Glynn County JWSC Finance Committee. It's 1:45, November the 20th, and I call the meeting to order. Public comment period. Do we have any public comment?
No, sir, we do not.
Doesn't look like it. Okay, we'll move on to approval. Minutes from the October 16th, 2019 Finance Committee meeting. I've read those. I'm fine with them.
Okay.
Are you okay with them?
Yeah,
You need a motion?
I move that we accept the minutes from
Second.
the October 16 meeting.
All in favor? Motion passes. Okay, minutes are accepted. Item 2, the East Beach Demery Improvements Project budget. Andrew?
Yes, sir.
That's yours.
Glynn County has a SPLOST project to put in intersection improvements in the form of a roundabout at East Beach Causeway and Demery. We have currently multiple assets that will be under the proposed roundabout that need to be relocated. Glynn County has traditionally paid for the pure relocation of assets, but in that area we have 4 force mains that come into an existing concrete structure that has been rehabbed twice in the last 5 years. And we also have some water lines, that don't manifold at all. So what we're looking to do moving forward with this, and the reason we're requesting project approval, is we're requesting they combine those 4 force mains into one prior to entering that intersection, as well as demo the existing vault that is concrete and put in a new HDP manhole for receiving there. With that many force mains coming into that structure, there is quite a bit of sewer gas that is corrosive in that area, so HDB is non-reactive to that. So that will allow us to potentially not have to mess with that for quite some time. So to do those 3 things, we're looking at about $100,000. Now, if you look at the back pages there, you'll see the overall cost estimate for everything included for Glynn County is a little over $2 million, but we would only be on for $100,000. And they have had the pre-bid for this and are looking to award bids at their December Finance Committee meeting. So they were asking what level of commitment we would have for them, and so we are recommending that we commit to those that we requested, not that they requested.
So the other $268,000 that you mentioned here.
That's just relocation costs.
We're off the hook for that, and the county's going to cover that. And then we can upgrade with the $100,000
That's correct.
with force main,
Yes, sir.
better force main, and also the box.
That's correct. So essentially, we'll take 4 smaller force mains, put them into one big force main, so you'll have one penetration into the new manhole, and then we'll have the new non-reactive manhole, so that we don't have that sinking structure out there. We did.
I'm fine with it.
I'm fine with moving it to the full commission.
We did look at, this will be reviewed again at facilities this afternoon. We did look at the plans yesterday, and one of the recommendations we made was to put the pipes and casing that are near the shoulder or driving lanes for the force main, and we have existing pipe on hand that can be used as that casing. So we will be providing that pipe to the contractor to put in so that we don't have to change their bid documents.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for you on the Finance Committee. Just general information is, I'm in support of the project. I have no issues in that regard for the need and the reasons that we want to move ahead to do it. Given that the county has a significant SPLOST investment forthcoming there, and we are doing numerous SPLOST projects in our system, is there opportunity for us where we underrun on a SPLOST project, that any of those funds remaining could be used for this purpose, as this project is related directly to a SPLOST project on behalf of the county. So it's just a question there, and the reason I offer that is I think we may have one right after the first year that appears that it's going to underrun the budget for that specific project, and the timing is going to be similar. If we could use those funds rather than reserve, I think that would be beneficial to all parties.
I think the problem we're going to run into is that we didn't ask for any SPOS dollars for St. Simon's Island. And everything in the SPOS vote was centered on North Mainland. And it would take some time to do some research to see if the language that we use that the voter read is of just the North Mainland area. Because then you would have to go back to the voters to say, oh, by the way, we've decided that we want to spend some SPOS over in St. Simon's Island. And that may cause some problems, so that's really a Charlie question.
Understood. We do have a SPOS project on the island that we're gonna execute right after the first of the year. And I think
Okay,
it
now
was
that
done with
is
the
a
previous-
different one.
That's
That's
SPOS five. That's
SPOS 5, and I don't know, is there an underrun on that?
There may be some underrun on that. We have, actually coming up on the next Glynn County agenda, there will be more of that SPOS 5 funding for water improvements on the island that hopefully will be transferred over. At Facilities Committee today, we're going to be considering a contract for the Sea Palms lining that come in well under budget. Now, that contract has some things in it that will come in. The pricing will be slightly higher than what was bid because there's some adders, but we should have sufficient funding in that SPOS 5 to cover this project.
Is there any sewer in SPOS 5?
Yes, the Sea Palms lining project was done with SPOS 5 dollars that were voted as sewer improvements on St. Simon's Island.
Well, if it's coming out of that bucket, you could do what you're asking.
Right.
If there's
So-
enough in there.
Right, so I'm just
Offset some of
asking,
it.
right, and I just wanted to offer a question for discussion for us to be sure that my understanding
Well,
is
I
clear.
think that what we need to do is direct staff to get with the attorney and see how much of that money you need to identify what the shortfall on the current project is, not shortfall, but the excess of the current project. And if the language of the ballot allows us to.
Do you need this to go before the full commission tomorrow? Just
Well,
Time.
essentially, we could approve the project funding to be SPOS if available or reserves if not,
Yeah.
and move it forward just because they're going to try to bid this project and accept bids and award prior to our next finance committee.
I think that we can forward it, and, you know, at the time we gotta come up with money is when that decision needs to be made by.
Exactly, yeah,
I think we
and
just
again, my,
just revise the motion.
That's correct.
Just
Yes, sir.
and or SPOS.
And remaining SPOS 5 funds, yes, sir.
yeah, and my intent here, Commissioner, was simply just to broaden our view as to the potential funding as an either or, as Andrew has offered as a,
Does the,
It's 4105, 4103, is that SPOS, 2016 SPOS?
No, sir.
That's,
4110 is 2016 SPOS, 4105, 4107. The pump station work is being pulled out of capital improvement funds. The downstream lining work's coming out of R&R.
your recommended action here does mention the funds coming from the R&R reserve.
That's correct. And the recommended action at that point, we did come back a little under budget on the Sea Palms project, but we should have enough for the 100,000 to do that. I had not considered that opportunity prior to Commissioner Duncan bringing it up, and I think that's a
The motion itself doesn't state that.
right.
Does this document just need to be modified under recommended action to incorporate R&R reserve for SPOS as appropriate?
We could do that, certainly for tomorrow, we can modify the motion. If it's approved today in finance and facilities this afternoon, we could have a modified motion tomorrow that includes the SPOS 5 wording.
The county manager said that if we had underruns on the SPOS
That's
project,
correct.
we could use it for other SPOS projects.
That's correct.
And this is another SPOS project, it's not our SPOS project, it's the county SPOS project.
I'll communicate with Charlie this afternoon to get clarification prior to tomorrow's meeting, but I don't foresee that being an issue.
Let's do that.
Yes,
So, you ready to move this forward?
yeah,
Do we need a motion?
I make a motion that the finance committee approve project funding for the amount of $100,000 for the East Beach/Demery Sewer Improvement Project. And this project funding approval be forwarded to the full commission for approval. It does not say where it's coming
Right.
from, so I think That's why you need the
It says it
motion.
up above under recommended action.
That's
But
just their
not the
recommended,
motion.
but that's not part of the
It's
motion.
not part of the motion. Second.
Go ahead, send that time.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes.
We'll let the construction people have to go on approve.
Is that coming before finance,
Yes,
facilities?
it is. Next meeting.
Next.
Item 2, potential pension changes.
Well, I think we skipped the,
Oh, I'm
First
sorry,
discussion.
that's right. Discussion, item 1. Banking RFP update recommendation schedule.
There, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to provide the update this afternoon. You may recall that Mr. Burrows had presented at the last full commission meeting a brief update of our activities to that point. That was on November the 7th. We had just received the responses from our proposers at that particular point. Those came in on the 5th of November. Just to recap, we had a total of 6 proposers, but of those proposers, they could bid on 1, 2, or all 3 services. So we got 3 responses for the banking services, 4 responses for the merchant services, and 2 responses for the investment services. After our initial review of those 6 proposers' packages, we did invite all 6 to participate in follow-up meetings or product demonstrations. We gave them a set amount of time during which they could present whatever follow-up information they wanted to present to us. We had a few follow-up questions that we presented to them. Those meetings were on the 13th and 14th of November. And the proposers' organizations were represented in varying sizes. One individual, one group brought 7. So you can see there was a wide variety there in between. As we were reviewing those proposals and the information provided to us in those meetings, we tried to keep our focus on a few select elements, especially one of those being customer service. How did the proposers' products and services that they were bringing to us help to enhance our external customer service experience? Another element that we kept in mind was convenience and ease of use. That was from the staff perspective. So how can those tools help our staff to work more efficiently? And then, of course, we considered cost effectiveness. How can the combination of products and services that were provided by those various proposers best allow us to be the keepers of the resources that had been entrusted to us? So in all those cases, our goal was to not only raise the bar on what we were expecting from our vendor, but also what we were providing to our customers. The next steps in that process are for us to continue to review the information that was presented to us in the proposals, the information that was presented to us in those meetings, and give thoughtful consideration to the scoring matrices that we had developed within the RFP. Those matrices will then be forwarded to our procurement department by the end of this week. We do have that as a deadline. Then the procurement department will take those, they will compile the results, and then the first week in December, the top tier proposers, we will have contact with their references. They have provided references to us in the proposal packages. So we'll reach out to them, we'll vet those groups for the products and services that those proposers have provided to them. Once we have that information, we will then formulate a formal recommendation that we will bring back to this finance committee. Our goal in doing so is in your next meeting, December 18th, with hopefully a full referral to the commission the next day on the 19th for a vote at that particular time. Keeping with that particular timeline will allow us to award the contract in early January, as our RFP schedule of events says that we will. So we are staying right on track with the proposed schedule and all of the timeline there within.
and if I'm not mistaken, the RFP required them to have, if we were making any changes, to have 90-day implementation.
Yes, sir,
So
that's
we would
correct.
be well up and running prior to any fiscal year changes, and hopefully up and running in March at the latest April.
Excellent point, thank you.
When you mention top tier
Yes, sir.
proposer,
Yes, sir.
is that one proposer or more than one that would be in the top tier?
Our goal is to have the actual top proposer from each of those 3 sections. Yes, sir.
3.
If we have scores that are close in proximity, if we're just a couple of points off, then we will go ahead and we will interview the references from the next proposer in line for that particular service. But in theory, it would be three proposers out of the group.
And when will those calls?
First week in December.
First week in
Right,
December.
again, we'll have our scoring matrices to procurement by the end of this week. Obviously, with the holiday week coming up next week, we want to give them a little time to get their information together and to compile those scores for us. And then the following week after that will be when we make those calls to those references.
Do you have a list of questions developed that you want to cover with
Yes, sir, we do.
the referrals?
Yes, sir, yes, sir, we do. Yes,
Does
sir.
it look like that, what you've looked at so far warrants us to change from our current system?
There are wonderful products and services presented by all of our proposers. There are some potentials for cost savings, but again, we have to look to the scoring to see how those will all shake out. So it's a little premature for me to have that answer at this particular juncture, but again, we're looking to raise the bar in all areas.
I will say from preliminary indications, whichever direction we decide to go, there should be a cost savings
Yes, sir,
to
that's
us
correct.
through this process.
Yes, sir.
Very good, thank you. Any
Thank
more
you.
questions, comments?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Let's move to item 2 now, potential pension changes.
Yes, sir. We presented this information at the HR committee last week. However, understanding that pension has been financial in nature, we wanted to present it to you as well. None of these are in any way selected or chosen, but we got the Siegel Consulting, who's the actuarial firm for the GMA retirement system, to run some scenarios for us to determine if we made changes to our existing pension program, what those cost savings may be into the future. And the way we had this done, we said on January 1 as just a selection that all future new hires after January 1 would go on to a Tier 2 plan. That would be one of 3 options. We would have them contribute, on this example was 2.5%. We could do 3% if that was desired of their salary. With our existing vesting schedule, we could do the same with a 5-year cliff and a 10-year cliff. And we looked at what those cost savings would be. Now, in the letter from Siegel, one thing I'll say is on the last paragraph there, it says the way this is looked at, none of the changes are projected to have a measurable effect on the funded status of the plan. And that's because all of your unfunded portion is essentially amortized as a 30-year mortgage. So they intend for you to pay this off of for a great deal of time. If they make any assumption changes in their actuarial calculations, they will put those on a 15-year schedule. So we have in our actuarial calculations from last year, they break out what that debt is, and currently we are projected to be funded, you're never going to be fully funded, but funded in 14.48 years. So the plan they're proposing here would not necessarily shorten that time frame. However, I think we have an option that will shorten that time frame moving forward. So if you look at the second page, I don't find the second page to be particularly helpful because it's just percentage of overall salaries. So that doesn't always tell you the story. Just because the percentage is decreasing, if salaries increase over the next 5 or 10 years, the overall cost may not decrease at all. However, if you look at the third page, it's got the overall contribution amount from the employer. Now granted, we have, the actuarial calculations are done a year in advance, so you're a year behind with the numbers every time. So if we made changes starting January 1, that would not impact next fiscal year's monetary amount because they would do the actuarial calculations for the following year. So next year, we're going to have the same payment roughly that we had this year either way because of the way they calculate that. But if you look at this, now the blue line shows our existing, if we didn't do anything to the current plan, certainly you see some growth there over the next 20 years. If we did either of the 3 options we're discussing here today, there is a marked decrease in the amount of funding required to pay off that debt. Now, if we went to 3%, these would be even more stark. They said that the contribution amount by the staff members has the greatest impact on the overall funding to the utility. Long term, once the unfunded portion is paid off, 6% of salaries is what is required to maintain the funding level. So that would be 6% overall. So if the staff is contributing 3%, then the utility would be only on the hook for the other 3%. Right now, we're paying the full 6%. And if you look at the numbers, we're paying closer to 7.5%. That 1.5% is the catch-up amount to try to pay off the unfunded portion of the liability. So if you look at this, what I proposed in the HR committee meeting was we're going to know what next year's number is. If we make changes next calendar year for new employees after that date, we should see a reduction in pension liabilities the following fiscal year. If we flat funded the pension from this year moving forward, let's just use round numbers and say our pension liability payment this year is $650,000. If we continue to pay $650,000, even if the recommended amount decreases from the changes, we could shorten that 14.5-year window to get the pension liability paid off. Essentially like making additional payments on your mortgage. So as you move forward over the next 5 or 10 years, you could potentially making $150,000, $200,000 of additional payments to get that unfunded portion down.
So you're looking at two options in general? No change and some sort of contribution by the employee to the fund.
Okay.
An investing period change.
And the vesting period.
Yeah,
And the vesting period
Yeah,
change.
this proposal is where you leave everybody that's currently on the plan, in the plan.
Mhm.
And then when you implement it, the next employee then falls into the defined contribution.
Mhm.
All right, and that's what all of his figures are based on, is the turnover rate of his employees, because the money that you put in for those employees, they don't walk with it within the vesting period generally, which you figure 5 years is, he has a significant turnover in 5 years, that you have money in that that you put in for that employee employee put in. But since they're not vested, they don't take any of their money, right?
Currently, new employees are third vested after 3 years and fully vested after 5 years. So that's a bit aggressive. The reason that was because the city and the county, when they combined the plans, one of them started vesting at 3 years and had an incremental vesting, and one of them had a 5-year cliff, so they combined the two and you ended up starting at 3 and ending at 5. So that is aggressive. So for new employees, we may have a 5-year or 10-year cliff. Our current employee makeup, if you look at the average employee tenure, it's closer to 8 years. However, we have 3 very long-term employees that is somewhat inflating that number. So our median is 4.8 years. So well under half of our workforce has less than 5 years, and that's because we do have a tremendous amount of turnover, particularly at the lowest levels of the organization. The staff members out in the field, sometimes they get in and they think it's a government job, it should be easy, and then they figure out putting in sewer pipe is not the easiest job they could do. So they decide very shortly thereafter that they don't want to work for us anymore. So there is a great deal of turnover. We average about 15%, which is 20 people a year, new hires. So if we're turning those over within a very short period of time, you're going to have the majority of your staff on the new plan.
Now, what is the value of the plan right now? How much money do we have in the plan, do you know?
The market value is around 4.5. The actuarial value is about 5.2
million.
Right.
4.5, 5.2.
The overall unfunded portion is 1.9 million.
And this 4.5 is in the hands of GMA?
Siegel does the investments, I believe, as well.
Well, GMA has an entire
Yeah.
investment team. They use all of the major stockbroker firms and other investment companies that sit on their advisory or their investment board.
Is there any kind of commitment from GMA? If, let's just say, they lost some of the money with the investments that they're doing. Is there any kind of responsibility that they have to make us whole on the money that's been lost?
I do not believe so. One thing they would do, and they did this about 3 years ago, they had a pretty rough year, and they changed one of the assumptions in the plan and extended out because they assumed a lower discount rate moving forward. They changed the unfunded liability portion to be paid over more years because they weren't going to get the returns they thought they were going to get. So that's what they would do. They would basically recalculate what that 30-year mortgage is based off of the new payments they're getting.
Okay.
So they don't have a commitment.
No, sir.
Any losses would have to be funded by us. This analysis, it's a good analysis you have here, and it assumes that the money's there.
It does.
The concern that I have is what if the money's not there? So if the money, I mean, you have to ask, I ask questions like, where in the world are they getting this 7.5% interest from, right? Because they have requirements on how they can invest that money. There are requirements, they're supposed to have AAA bonds, maybe, I don't know what the list of requirements is, but there are some requirements. I can't get 7.5% with money personally, unless I go to the stock market.
Right.
Go to the stock market, you can get 25% since the first of the year, maybe, you know?
Now, I
You
will
can
say
make
that
some money.
GMA does not have the same restrictions we have on investments.
Um,
So they're a little more open for investing purposes than what we are. They don't have to necessarily be in U.S. securities or anything like that. They can go out to the stock market for some things.
What's becoming common knowledge in the marketplace is that the pension funds are being invested in an instrument that's very similar to the mortgage market, what it was back in 2008, 2009, with derivatives and these CLOs. They're called CLOs, or these organizations. There are about 8,000 of them out there now that have developed over the last 10 years that are levering money, since interest rates are so low, and pension funds have to have 7.5% in order to work. They have this new form of a organization has developed to lever that money to get more interest. Let's say, for example, you have $10 million and you make 5% interest. Well, in order to get 7.5, if I can go out and borrow $5 million and put it with a 10, then I can get 5% on that 5 and 5% on the 10, pay back the 5, and now I have 7.5%. That's lever. And that's just kind of big picture lever that doesn't take into account all the expenses and all the commissions. So they're doing that. And so there are two sides to the deal that the CMA has, the CLO has. The CLO is taking money from the pensions, they have the money, and they're loaning it out to investments that would otherwise be considered riskier than bonds. They're not going into AAA bonds. And you can't call these junk bonds because they're not junk bonds. They're like commercial paper. They're like short-term. They're putting all this money in these short-term loans. And they're loaning it to corporations. And corporations, where they can't get the money elsewhere, they're borrowing the money from these funds. And of course, they're using it not for capital improvements, but to buy back their stocks, which drives the stock market up. That's the cycle that's going on. This kind of thing was going on back in 2008, 2009, and that was the mortgage crisis. They found another way to get that money. So my concern is that, and this is the marketplace's concern, we have all these pension funds now that the money has been taken out of the pension fund and invested into corporations that are not AAA bonds, that has been used this way. And the fear is that that money may not come back. An example that we were talking about before, 40 years ago, I had a broker call me up, I was just starting my career, and he said, I've got a bond with Kroger Corporation, it's $1,000. It'll pay you, I don't remember the interest rate, 10%. It's a junk bond. But Kroger's a good company, so you don't have to worry about it defaulting. So a year later, he called me up and he said, the good news is you got your 10%. Here's your $100. The bad news is they defaulted on the bond and you lost your $1,000. The reason you get higher interest is because you take on more risk, which means somebody's going to lose the money somewhere. Okay, so if they lever up, if they're levering up, if they take our $5 million, or our, what was it? Call it $5 million. If they take our $5 million and they borrow $2.5 million and they lever it, and then they lose a bunch of that, we gotta pay back the 2.5, they gotta pay back the 2.5 million. The 5 million is now 2.5, and they lost some of it. If I was an employee, and I was being asked to contribute to this scheme, my own hard-earned money, I think I would prefer to have the option to contribute my money somewhere else. Put it into a different pot and have alternatives for how that money's being invested. And then I'd be diversified.
Sure.
I'd have more than one option. I'd have my pension, and I'd have my little pot of money going on here. And I think as an employee, I would like more options. So I was saying that was a long discussion. This is a great analysis, but it assumes the money's there. And I think we're dealing in a marketplace right now where it's questionable whether or not the money's going to be there. I mean, we're all wondering if we can get a Social Security or not, right?
I probably won't get that Social Security.
Well, why not? If you don't get the Social Security, then the pensions are in trouble too. It's all tied together.
It is.
Just an observation here, Andrew. The analysis was provided to show where we might improve our position as the utility in terms of contribution amounts extending out 20 plus years, well, almost 30 years now. And so there's two potential concerns I see here. One is, do we consider managing the risk better on the $4.845 million that's currently in the pension fund? I see that as independent of a selection for a different choice. And if we pick a different choice, we actually put more responsibility and choice into the hand of the employee that they may choose to invest theirs, Commissioner, as you suggested, and whatever instruments would be available. And those could be in fixed bonds, municipals, equities, et cetera.
You do recognize they have that choice already.
Understood. And they would get even more handle on that with a greater participation. So I see the benefit of this analysis would be that, number one, they put more skin in the game up front and potentially move the vesting period out further, which would reduce the long-term indebtedness on utility, ultimately our customers. So I kind of segregated into two areas. One is if we have concern about the long-term risk on the current balance that's in the fund, we have to deal with that. And then this other is a choice that we have to make as to how we want to moderate our cash outflow for this particular benefit. In my view, I think the 5 and 10 year vesting periods represent some interest there. I would just want to have an understanding is regionally, what is the prevailing cliff period? Is it a 5-year or is it a 10-year? And regionally, if that's in the sweet spot somewhere, then that's very appealing because we can continue to offer benefit that is attractive to employees. But we also help them understand that they have skin in the game through a contribution and that they get to manage that investment. And by the way, they don't come here for a short-term experience in their career life. They come here to make a vesting not only in themselves but in the utility and into the community. So the vesting cliff needs to be out some period of time. It becomes a benefit Velcro, if you will. It's encouraging them to stay longer. So those are my thoughts about those two issues of managing the risk for the pot that's there, and then the other is helping our employees to recognize that we want to be a great place to live, to work, But by the way, we want you to make a bet investment in yourself in the utility longer term than 1 year.
Well, what are the investment choices that an employee has now for the, for lack of a better term, the IRA portion of the, because I don't remember what the numbers are.
You're talking about the defined, or the pre-tax deferred
Right.
compensation plan. I'm not sure what the full range of choices is. I know there are groups of them. If you're getting close to retirement, it goes into a safer investment. There's some riskier ones for younger employees. So there are various pools.
Now, we make no investment choices with the money that we put in.
We don't put any money into the deferred compensation plan.
The 457 plans, where you
457
have those
plans.
options.
So we don't put money
we do
into
not
that,
put money into that.
but the money that we do for our defined
For our defined
benefit
plan.
plan,
We
we don't participate in those
No,
decisions.
sir, those decisions are made by GMA and their investment team.
Okay. GMA is who again?
Georgia Municipal Association.
Okay, is that a state-sponsored organization?
Yes, sir.
So what is the state's responsibility if they lose the money?
That I can't answer right now. We do get an annual report, an audit report from GMA, and I believe that lists their various investment pools. I think I distributed the last one to the commission at one time.
Okay.
But a little over a year ago.
GMA is not a state agency at all.
No, they're not a
I don't
state
have the
agency.
state would have any responsibility.
Does the state have any responsibility?
GMA is representing all the cities.
Yeah, city, yeah, towns and cities.
Okay.
So we send the money to GMA, or do we send the money to the state and they send it to GMA?
We send the money directly to GMA.
Directly to GMA. It would be good to know if there's any sort of responsibility if they lose that money. I like one of the things Commissioner Duncan did, that he said was managing risk. And if we think about the concept of managing risk, and we tie that in with how underfunded we are in the plan, if we get 5 years down the road where you've fully funded it, or gotten close to fully funding it, and they lose the money, it's gone. However, if we took a different direction and we said, let's increase our underfunded level, let's let it dwindle down, but let's start taking that additional funding that's required and to bring it to as close to 100% as we can and create our own reserve. And that money will be there. If a crisis does occur, then we will have that money and they will not have lost it. And then we can put that money back into the plan at the end of the crisis. That's managing, that's one of the ways you manage risk.
So essentially, let me make sure I understand your point here. Essentially, you're saying with the idea of level funding it at the 650, whatever that gap is, we would put that into a reserve on ourselves. Instead of trying to pay off the unfunded portion early, we'd keep that money to mitigate against some risk of something happening with GMA.
It'd be a restricted reserve. It would be, let's say you get 5 years down the road and we find out they've lost $2.5 million. Well, if we had underfunded and all they had in their hands was $2.5 million, well, we might have $5 million sitting over here in this fund. But let's say we gave them all of that money and they lost it. Well, now we've got to come up with a difference.
I'm not sure that our look at the future is any better than theirs.
Well, we know what they're doing with, we need to know what they're doing with the money. They're taking on levels of risk that may be questionable.
I know where you're coming from, but I don't know how you mitigate risk any better other than change the assets. You want to go out and buy gold?
There's
I don't know.
a contact to GMA. You can call and talk to.
Yeah, we can certainly get you the contact information you can speak
Tell
to.
you everything about he's in Atlanta, so you can go visit.
It may be that some of these other
It'd be good for you to do that.
cities are like 54% funding level. They may be doing that for a reason. They may be a strategy.
According to GMA, they consider a plan fully funded if it gets above 90%. So, they said that the average plan across the state is somewhere in the low 80s right now. So we were at around 76% funded, so we're not that much lower than where the general population is as far as GMA retirement.
It's probably a good idea to try to visit, find out who the representative is.
Well, can we get them to come down?
They wouldn't come down. I
They-
think it'd be best just to, if you want to talk to the guy, and then Steve talk to the guy.
I think that may be fair. You've got very detailed questions that would be much easier answered by him. And maybe you asking them directly, we wouldn't lose in translation what the purpose of the question is.
Okay.
Ultimately, we want to protect our employees.
Absolutely.
Do the best thing for them we can.
Absolutely.
Okay, we finished with that one for now?
I am.
Okay, good. Item 3, financial statements, month end October 31st. Don.
Commissioners, we have the October 31 financial statements packages. A couple of things to note on the balance sheet, starting there. You'll see that our accounts receivable net of allowance has dipped below $2 million for, I believe that's the first time ever.
It's the first time since I've been here, it's been under $2 million.
And and on the other side of that, the reserve for bad debts has dipped below $1 million. So that is an indication we are doing much better collecting on our debts. Especially when we take into consideration that our billings are greater than they have been. They're continuing to grow. So that's a very positive step.
So that's not due to write-offs. That's due to actual collection.
Write-offs do affect that, but write-offs are a smaller piece than the actual aging of the receivables is.
So, now this does not include the school board paying their bill, right?
Yes, the school board is included in that.
In the reduction?
No, in the 1.9, the amount the school
not
board
in
owes
this
is
reduction,
included in
no.
that.
So,
Once that comes in, this number will drop another almost $500,000.
okay. That's good.
That looks good.
Yes, it does.
Definitely positive direction in that.
Further down on the balance sheet in the restricted cash accounts, you can see that the total has grown from just over 40 million at the beginning of the year to almost 45 million. The bulk of that is in SPLOST accounts and in the JWSC deposits to the repair and replacement reserve in particular. Also, the customer receivable or customer deposit account has grown to some extent. That money, particularly in the SPLOST account and in the repair and replacement reserve, will be depleted very rapidly once the construction starts on the projects that are in planning right now. Other than that, there's not too much of note on the balance sheet. I wanted to point out those couple of things. On the operation, on the next page is the supplemental scheduled cash balances.
Back on the balance sheet, there was a big drop in accounts payable from 1.3 million down to.
That's really kind of, at year end, we hold the payables open because anything that is invoiced as of June 30th has to be brought back, even though we don't actually even receive the invoice sometimes until into August. So all of those have to back up into June, so everything is in June. In October, there's probably some lingering invoices out there that aren't included. Also, it depends on what day of the week the month ends on, because we make payroll, or we make invoice or vendor payments on Thursday or Friday of each week. So if the month ends on a Wednesday, it's probably going to be higher. If it ends on a Friday, the balance will be lower, simply because we pay vendors a few days before. So that's really,
It's a timing issue.
it's really just a timing issue. The next page is the, again, supplemental schedule of cash balances in the operating accounts, the reserves held by the JWSC, the trustee reserves, and then those legally restricted reserves being the SPLOST capital improvements and customer deposits. And then breaks it down by the amounts that being held in cash at BB&T Bank in an overnight interest account, and those that are being held in investment accounts. Right now, of the JWSC reserves, 97.8 of those are in, percent of that is in investment accounts, and 94% of the capital improvement fees is in investment accounts. And that again is, we true those accounts up once a month usually. We go through and see what we should have deposited, what we did pay, and then we net transfer back or forth to fund those reserves.
Okay. Thank you.
Excuse me. Next page is the combined statement of revenues for the 4 months of this fiscal year. Starting with revenues, sewer revenues, water revenues, debt charges, and administrative fees are all ahead of budget for the year. Sewer revenues are 9.8, water revenues 7.8, and there's very little difference in between budget and actual for the administrative fees and the debt service charges. So the count of REUs and count of customers is pretty close, but it does indicate that there is higher usage than we had anticipated.
For example, the sewer revenues, your estimated year end of 15.465 million.
Yes, that's a straight proration.
That's a proration of the
of what we've
year-to-date
received
actual.
in the first 4 months. Yes.
And how realistic is that?
It may
Same
be a
thing
little,
with water
probably a
revenues.
little high because a lot of this was in the summertime. When
Depends on how much it
higher
rains.
use. And
I mean,
typical
honestly, it
usage,
depends on how much it rains.
typical usage drops off in the late winter, early spring, so that number will tighten up a little bit more by year end.
Just a general comment, John, if our revenues are seasonally impacted in the fourth quarter of a calendar year, then perhaps we ought to look at our forecasting based on the seasonal impacts as opposed to a linear forecast. And then we don't have to have a gap adjustment or explanation each period, just consideration.
We could go back several years and see just what that seasonal fluctuation is.
Exactly. Yeah, and understandably that, to Andrew's point, we're going to have some wet seasons, maybe wetter than others, et cetera, but at least the gap will track much closer based on consumption.
And sometimes it's as much event driven as it is weather driven with things like the Georgia-Florida game, the golf classic, and so
Sure.
on, when we could have more visitors in the area.
Right.
It does show a spike in usage during those type of events.
Okay, thank you.
You're also forecasting the other income to be higher, and the actual is higher than we anticipated. I was under the impression other income was actually going to be a little lower because of issues with well, with this rental property over here, and
Yes, and
we lost that income.
Yes, and we didn't budget for that income, and we haven't received any, so that would be a net of zero in the variances. And we did drop.
And the tower revenue, didn't they go down?
I think we may have dropped that a little bit, but some of the other things like our late fees and other user charges, we dropped down significantly because we wanted to be very conservative with our budgeting on that.
Well, also in the other income portion is the operational fees that not the capital portion, but the operational portion of the fees when somebody purchases a new tap. Cost of the meter, the cost of the labor to put that in goes into that other income category. So depending on how the building is going, that impacts that as well.
So do you think that's where it's coming from now?
Not entirely, but that is a contributing factor, yes, sir.
There are a whole number of other things going there. How much our debt collection agency collects from debt that's turned over to them affects that number as well. And those are sometimes very hard to gauge.
Do we know how many people time on each month?
Yes, sir.
Can we get that number?
Yes, sir.
Can we do this?
Absolutely.
And also unaccounted for water, see, if it's changed.
We've been trying to compile that report for you. It's a little difficult to do because the billing periods and the reporting periods for the water don't match up exactly. But we can get you a general idea. They're not going to be perfect because the billing periods
Our
aren't.
year average out over years, so.
Theoretically, it'd be pretty close, yes, sir.
Yeah, if you had a rolling 52 weeks, then that would be close enough.
Right.
And do we know how many customers are going to cut off every month? What is that?
It's not currently reported in the statements, but we have those numbers from the billing groups, the 13 billing groups in each of the cutoff cycles that we have. So we can compile those numbers for you if that's requested.
Do you have an estimate of what that is?
I'd rather not guess. I'd rather give accurate information if that's all right.
And we'll say that, you know, last year we started, or beginning of this fiscal year, we started putting more of our reserves into investment accounts, and that is being reflected in the interest income line item as well there. That's income that we previously were not getting.
Well, expenses are less too.
Yes, sir.
The operating expenses are down.
And ultimately, the vast majority of the overages and personnel expenses was because of the overtime during the hurricane that we can't get reimbursed for.
So you're forecasting on operating expenses, it looks like 800,000 below budget?
As of today,
It's about just under 500,000 is the projection to year end. 22.5 for 22,557,000 for budget versus 22,066,000 for projected year end.
Yeah, I was looking at this line item. That's a good point that you mentioned that. It brings to my attention that in those expenses, we have governing body, then personnel expenses, and then operating expenses, and then capital costs, and then the total category is called operating expenses. The third item down, operating expenses, what's that? It should have a label.
That's the parts, material, contracted repairs, safety equipment.
we can come up with a different title for you if that would help clarify.
That's the one that's $800,000
If you
forecast.
wanted to see exactly what's, and going back to your question about the, what's in other income and what causes that to vary, if you go to the 20-page document that gives you the actual detail of what's in each of those accounts. For instance, on the top of page 20 of 2 of 20 of that, the bulk of the overage in other revenues, $205,000 of that is in service fees, which are miscellaneous fees to our customers for turn-offs, for account establishment fees, for more than one reread during the year and that type of thing. Late payment fees are $41,000 over budget. bad debt recovery that we mentioned before, that's about just over $16,000 over budget. Our debt collection agency is doing a better job for us. And then proceeds of sale, which is actually, that was actually an insurance recovery on a vehicle. And some of the, I mean, that might be some of the things that are declared surplus and that we sell. That's $20,000, $21,000 over budget so far this year. So that, those detailed pages give you every line item that is included in that subgroup. Likewise with the operating expenses, you see each of the divisions has a subtotal within it for the budgeted operating expenditures, so you can see what's in each of those within each division.
So this report is forecasting almost $3.5 million of excess money at the end of the year.
Yes, sir. And if we go back to the same time last year, the numbers, I believe, would be in the same range.
So it's just timing at this point.
This time, because the purchase orders are not included in that projection moving forward, and a lot of those purchase orders are large. You've got the manhole rehab contracts, a couple $100,000, all the vehicles that haven't come in yet that we ordered. Those add up into purchase orders, and next month, if we pay for 5 or 6 vehicles and it goes into the expenses instead of the purchase orders, that projection may drastically change when ultimately our spending patterns have not. It's just when the things come in.
So you think if we put seasonality into this report, that number would look better, more realistic?
The only one, yes, we try to do that. We did not do that with capital purchases, but next year we'll just put the year-to-date budget for capital purchases starting the first of the
I
year.
made manual adjustments to the capital purchases in there, but again, sometimes supplies are purchased, for instance, chemicals may be purchased 6 months in a 6-month supply at a time, so we're spending the money now, and if we annualize that to go up to the end of the year, we're actually building it up or overstating what we think the cost would be. We try to, that projection to year end is actually a manual calculation that we have to do outside of the system. So when I generate these reports, I simply take a pro rata number to project out to the year end, and then make specific adjustments to some of them, such as the capital purchases. If the truck hasn't been purchased yet, we take that out of the budget. If I see something that is, and during our budget reviews with each division before this, we identify some of those things, and I believe some of that information is included in your packages that are emailed to you each month.
Here's the question. Where are we gonna end in June 30th?
With more revenues
So I
than
don't
expenses.
expect you to give that answer right now, okay? But that's the answer that's needed.
That answer, Commissioner.
I understand, John, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but that's where we want to go, okay? Is that I can appreciate what you have here. This is all really good. I can see the summary page and then the fire hose, okay? So I'm okay with all those. It's just at a glance, we have the year-end forecast, and we know that's going to adjust. There's going to be some gap closure. So just where I'm headed with this is, let's try to make this living document a little bit tighter, so that while we're only 4 months into the fiscal year, got that, but how much confidence would we want to place on a year-end forecast at this point? Okay? Not suggesting that you slice and dice this thing a whole lot to come up with a better number than this roughly 7.4, okay? But that's directionally where I'd like to see it, okay? It's, again, it's only a 4-month look, and I expect in the next reporting period, et cetera, particularly once we get past the new year, we'll feel pretty confident where we're going to land. So that's what I just want to offer, okay?
Could you add 2 columns to the left side of the sheet and insert 2019 budget, 2019 actual, and start off with the,
On a year-to-date?
yeah, just the final.
Okay.
I'm not so much worried about year-to-date as I am about the year-end estimate.
Okay.
So we can see, you know, what we budgeted, what our actual was, and compare it to what, you know, our estimate is. Because that'll give you some idea of how valid your estimate is. Is if, and I don't have, I mean, I know we have it, but I don't have it right now. And in June, when we were looking at it, we still had outstanding purchase order payments that we needed to make. So I don't know that we've ever really seen the final numbers. We got the audit report, but sometimes that groups things a little differently than what we're grouping them as.
We did feel comfortable with moving $1 million into
So I know we did.
which were excess funds from last year.
Yeah, well, this, we'll know, I think the question is this, we're saying almost $3 million.
3.4.
Yeah, so,
That's a lot of seasonality, but that could be realistic. I mean, we just.
yeah, but that'll help.
On the expenses, last year's expenses were right at 22 million. So from projection purposes for expenses, it's pretty close. The revenues, there's some more seasonality to than expenses.
And a new portion of it, but I know that the expenses ought to be about the same.
The expenses, last year's
Because
expenses are pretty.
we haven't raised rates to generate more revenue. And the only thing that could be different is that our operating methodology is improving. That means that we don't have as much overtime. Things aren't breaking as much. We're not having to spend a lot of crew time out there. So, and we have, I think part of it, I think our operating cost for vehicles and other equipment is probably down from what it was.
Yeah, the overall execution is improving.
Yeah.
And that's really the messaging that we want to put forward. And of course, John, the numbers you provide us just underscores that. It's not the messaging that we want to put out. The messaging is that we're executing much better. Perfect example is the hauling solution that we came up with. And we already forecasted what that's going to do, and it'll be a turnaround in less than 1 year. So that's the kind of messaging that we want to move forward. And John, the numbers that you provide us just underscores the very good execution that's occurring.
Well, on the sludge hauling, if I might interject, we started in about half of September. We got our first full month bill a couple of weeks ago. It was about $15,000 for all three plants combined to haul to the landfill versus our traditional bill, which was $40,000. So $25,000 a month, that adds up very rapidly.
And that's one initiative of many that are ongoing. So I think what we're all trying to say here is there's a lot of positive that's happening, but the numbers just underscore it. So.
The other, another focus would be the commission's desire to keep our money fully invested in earning money. If we look at the interest income budget was $42,000, we're actually at $173,000 for the year, which is keeping more of switching our day-to-day accounts to all of them being interest-bearing, and the keeping more of our money into the actual investment accounts for that. On the other side, though, the investment fees, banking fees are $87,000 year to date, and we only had $20,000 budget for the year. So they're both increased, but the net result is our income net of fees so far this year is $85,600. Our pro rata budget is $41,000, so we're still $40,000 ahead of budget.
Right. And the big question perhaps our customers would ask is, okay, you're doing all these things, but so what? How's that going to impact my bill? Now, while we can't, what we affect on our consumer's bill is the rate. They're the ones in charge of the consumption, right? So we can't really answer the question, how are we going to affect their bill? But we can say, we're stabilizing the rate from year to year so you can plan better year to year. So each of these initiatives, John, the financial ones, the operational issues where we're scoring points, all those added together reinforce rate stabilization. And that's what Commissioner Copeland's been driving in each of his meetings for the Finance Committee.
And the things that we're discussing right now are the things that we'll be discussing with staff after the holidays, when we start going into the budgeting process and going through these things and getting better year-end estimates so that we can forecast into the 2021 year.
Yeah, that brings up a point that I've been thinking about. We're doing well on hauling, right? We have a lot of septic haulers. Why don't we look and see if there's an opportunity for us to do grease traps and do septic? And how we would manage that, because that's a truck and a driver, essentially, right?
Essentially, what may make more sense would be for us to invest some capital money into a grease receiving facility and allow the private industry drivers to bring that to us. Typically, we don't want to cut our private industry partners out of their income stream.
Okay.
Do we have any more business?
I do have one thing of business, a bit of good news, breaking news for Ms. Pam over there. We have recently learned our new appointment to the board for the next 4 years is Commissioner Turnipseed, so.
Yay.
So, thankfully, we get to keep him around for 4 more years this time instead of just 2.
That's great news. There being no further business to come before the committee, meeting is closed.